The two suns of the planet Varus IV burned high in the orange sky, turning the endless sand into shimmering waves of light. Ethan had been stranded there for months. His ship, once shining and proud, was now a broken frame half buried in the dunes. The communication beacon still blinked weakly, sending out a distress signal that no one ever answered. Every morning he woke up to silence, and every night he fell asleep listening to the wind. He had learned how to survive with almost nothing. He built a small camp near the wreck, used torn metal sheets for shade, and collected morning dew from the surface of his tent to drink. But his supplies had nearly run out. The last ration pack was gone, and all that remained in his pocket was one small piece of chocolate wrapped in silver foil. He had been saving it for the day he got rescued, a little reward for making it off this planet alive. But rescue was becoming nothing more than a fading dream. Ethan walked slowly across the ridge, his boots sinking into the soft sand. His body was weak, his throat dry, but he kept going. The sun was cruel and the wind carried the sound of shifting dunes. He scanned the horizon with his old handheld device, hoping to find something, anything, alive. For days the scanner had shown nothing but dust and rocks, but this time the screen flickered. There was movement ahead. Not mechanical, biological. Ethan frowned. That shouldn't be possible. The record said Varus IV was lifeless, but the signal was there. A faint pulse of life just beyond the ridge. His heart began to beat faster. He climbed up the slope, sand sliding under his boots. When he reached the top, he froze. Below him, in the shadow of a half-buried wreck, lay a figure. At first he thought it was a mirage caused by heat and exhaustion. But as he focused, the figure moved weakly, a small shape, thin, struggling to crawl forward. The sunlight reflected faintly off skin that shimmered like liquid silver. Ethan's breath caught. It was a girl. At least she looked like one. Her limbs were slender, her hair pale and long, tangled with dust. Her eyes, half open, glowed faintly with light. She was alive, but barely. For a long moment, Ethan stood still, unsure what to do. He had been alone for so long that seeing another living being felt unreal. Then instinct took over. He slid down the ridge and ran toward her. The sand burned his legs, but he didn't care. When he reached her, she tried to speak. The sound that came out was soft and melodic, like a whisper of wind through glass. He couldn't understand a word. Her breathing was shallow and her hands trembled as she reached toward him before collapsing back into the sand. Hey, it's okay," Ethan said quickly, kneeling beside her. "You're going to be fine." He looked at her closely. There were strange markings on her torn clothes, glowing patterns that pulsed faintly. She didn't seem dangerous, just starving. Desperate. He opened his water canister and poured a small amount into the cap. Gently, he held it to her lips. She hesitated, then sipped slowly. The look on her face when the water touched her tongue made his heart tighten. She must not have had water for days. When she finished, Ethan searched his pockets for food. There was nothing left except that one piece of chocolate. He stared at it. It was the last bit of sweetness he had from Earth. But then he looked at her again. Her silver eyes were dull, her body shaking with weakness. He sighed softly, unwrapped the chocolate, and held it out. "Here," he said quietly. "It's food. Eat it." She looked at the brown piece in confusion, unsure what it was. Ethan broke a small piece off, put it in his mouth, and smiled. "See, it's good, try." Her thin fingers reached forward. She took the piece carefully, as if it were something sacred. When she tasted it, her eyes widened. For a moment, her whole face changed. The trembling stopped, and a faint light glowed around her eyes. She whispered something in her soft, musical voice. Ethan didn't understand the words, but her tone was gentle, grateful. He smiled a little. "You're welcome." After a few minutes, she managed to sit up. Her hands still shook, but some strength had returned. Ethan watched her silently, feeling a strange warmth inside. He had given away his last bit of comfort, and yet somehow he felt better than he had in weeks. He pointed to himself. "Ethan," he said. She blinked and tilted her head. Then she touched her chest lightly. "Lyra," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "Lyra." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile. She looked around, confused by the barren landscape. Her eyes lingered on his broken ship in the distance, then back to him. She said a few more words, motioning with her hands, but he couldn't understand. "Yeah, I don't speak, whatever that is," Ethan said with a small laugh. "But we'll figure it out." He helped her stand. She leaned on him, light as air. Together they walked toward his camp. The twin suns were sinking lower, casting long shadows across the dunes. Every step was slow, careful, but they made it before night fell. Inside the small tent, Lyra sat quietly while Ethan prepared some warm water. She watched every movement with wide, curious eyes, how he lit the heating coil, how the small screen flickered, how he poured the water into a cup. It was as if she had never seen human technology before. When he handed her the cup, she took it with both hands and whispered something softly, a word that sounded like Yanara. The sound was filled with emotion, like a thank you spoken from the heart. Ethan nodded, though he didn't know what it meant. "You're welcome," he said again. For a while, neither of them spoke. Outside, the night winds began to howl. The tent creaked under the force, and sand tapped against the metal sheets like rain. Inside, the air was quiet except for the soft hum of the power cell. Lyra sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the heater's faint glow. Ethan watched her silently. There was something about her, something delicate but powerful. The way she moved, the way she looked at things, it wasn't like a lost wanderer. It was like someone who came from a world far beyond his understanding. He tried speaking again. "Lyra, you understand me?" She tilted her head thinking, then shook it gently. But after a moment, she pointed at him, then at her chest. "Same," she said in a broken accent. Ethan smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "Same." As the night grew colder, Lyra seemed to relax a little. She closed her eyes, her head tilting slightly to one side, her breathing soft and even. Ethan looked at her and felt a strange peace. For the first time in months, he wasn't alone. The next morning, Ethan woke to a strange sound, a low hum that seemed to come from the sky. Lyra was already outside, her silver hair fluttering in the wind. She was staring toward the horizon, her expression filled with both fear and hope. Ethan followed her gaze. Far in the distance, something was moving through the sky, a ship, sleek, massive, shining with silver light. It wasn't human. Its design was too perfect, too elegant. His heart started racing. "Is that yours?" he asked, but she didn't answer. The ship descended slowly, sand whipping through the air as it came closer. Lyra stepped forward, her hands trembling. Ethan stood beside her, unsure what to do. The air was filled with the sound of engines that didn't sound like any technology he knew. The ship stopped above the dunes, and a ramp opened with a hiss. Figures stepped out, tall beings in shining armor, their eyes glowing faintly like Lyra's. They spoke in her language, fast and sharp. Lyra replied weakly. Ethan took a step back, unsure if these newcomers were friendly. Then, to his surprise, the soldiers dropped to one knee before Lyra. He blinked, confused. What are they doing?" Lyra turned to him, her expression filled with something deep, sadness, relief, maybe guilt. She said a few words softly, her tone apologetic. One of the armored figures approached Ethan. His voice was deep, calm, and clear. "Human," he said in perfect English. "You are in the presence of Her Highness Princess Lyra of the Selen Dominion." Ethan's mind went blank. "Princess?" He looked at her. The fragile, starving girl he had found half dead in the sand. She was looking at him now with gentle eyes, her lips moving in a faint smile. You're a princess?" he asked in disbelief. She nodded slowly, stepping closer. Her hand brushed his arm lightly, a silent thank you. The soldier continued, "You have aided her during her exile. For this, you will be taken under royal protection." "Wait," Ethan said quickly. "I didn't do anything. I just gave her some water, He stopped, remembering the chocolate. Lyra spoke again in her own language, her tone firm. The soldiers bowed their heads, obeying her command. Then she turned to Ethan and said softly, "Come, please." Her eyes were pleading, and for some reason he couldn't say no. He nodded slowly. As they walked toward the waiting ship, the wind blew across the dunes, erasing their footprints. The ramp lifted, and the great vessel rose into the sky, leaving behind the broken camp and the silent desert. Ethan looked out through the window as the planet grew smaller beneath them. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the stars. She turned slightly and whispered a few words in her language. Though he didn't understand them, he felt their meaning. Gratitude, promise, connection. He smiled faintly. "You're welcome," he said again. He didn't know it yet, but the simple act of giving away his last piece of chocolate had just changed his life, and perhaps the destiny of two worlds. The ship glided silently over the desert, leaving Varys far below. Inside, the atmosphere was cooler and breathable, the hum of the engine steady and calming. Ethan followed Lyra down a long corridor lined with glowing panels and walls that shimmered faintly, as if alive. The air smelled faintly sweet, a mixture of alien flora and recycled oxygen. Ethan had been in many strange places, but nothing like this. Every corner of the ship reflected precision and elegance, yet it felt alive, as if the entire vessel were aware of its occupants. Lyra walked ahead, her small hand brushing against the walls, her silver eyes absorbing every detail. Her movements were delicate, almost ceremonial, but her posture carried a quiet authority that Ethan could not ignore. He finally spoke. "So this is your ship?" She turned her head slightly, her gaze soft. She didn't answer with words, but her expression said everything, yes. After a few moments, the ship hummed and a door slid open. They entered a large chamber. Light poured in from the walls, revealing a room bigger than any building Ethan had seen on Earth. Tall windows showed a view of stars streaking past. Ethan felt small. This was no ordinary spacecraft. It was a palace in space, elegant and immense, designed for someone of importance. Lyra guided him to a small platform in the center of the room. As he stepped onto it, a soft chime sounded and the walls around them shifted, revealing several figures standing quietly. They were all adorned in shimmering robes and armor, similar to the soldiers who had escorted them, but each carried a different aura: wisdom, authority, vigilance. Ethan realized he was standing in the middle of the royal court of the Selen Dominion. He swallowed hard. Lyra stepped forward and said something quickly in her language. The figures listened intently, then nodded. One of them, taller than the rest, with a crown-like ornament on his head, turned to Ethan. "You are the human who aided Princess Lyra?" the man asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Ethan nodded. "Yes, I found her starving on Varus 4. I gave her some water and a piece of chocolate." He hesitated, feeling the absurdity of it. "That's it. I didn't know she was—" The court laughed softly, a gentle melodic sound. Lyra looked embarrassed, her small hands fidgeting. Ethan noticed that even in this grand court she seemed humble, almost shy. "Your gesture," the tall figure said, "is remarkable. Simple yet meaningful. You have shown the humanity we rarely see from your kind." Ethan blinked. "From my kind?" The man's eyes were serious. "Your species is known across the outer systems for many things. Bravery, curiosity, but also recklessness. It is rare to find humans who act with compassion without seeking reward. You human have done that." Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through him. He had been alone, afraid and struggling to survive. He had only given a starving girl what little he had. Yet here, in the middle of an alien royal court, that small act carried weight. Lyra stepped closer to him, her small hand brushing against his arm. "She means what she says," Ethan thought, though he didn't understand her language. Her eyes reflected trust, gratitude, and something deeper: connection. The tall figure continued. "Because of your kindness, Princess Lyra's return to the Dominion has been made possible. You will be our guest, human. You will learn our ways, our histories, and perhaps you will teach us of yours." Ethan hesitated. "I don't know if I belong here. I'm just stranded. I have no title, no power, nothing." "You have courage," another court member said. "Courage is more powerful than titles. It brought you here." Over the next hours, Ethan was introduced to the customs of the Selen Dominion. Every gesture, every word, every movement of the princess carried meaning. Lyra spoke softly to him, teaching him phrases in her language, guiding him through etiquette, showing him how to respect their traditions without losing his own sense of self. At mealtime, Ethan saw food unlike anything he had imagined. It shimmered softly, colors shifting, textures that seemed to dance on the plate. Lyra helped him eat, laughing quietly when he hesitated. He noticed that even the simplest gestures, lifting a piece of food to the mouth, sipping a glowing liquid, were filled with elegance and care. Days passed quickly aboard the ship. Ethan helped Lyra in small ways, fixing minor tools, explaining human devices, and in return, she showed him parts of her culture that were sacred, parts of her world she had been hiding even from her soldiers. He realized that the princess, though young and seemingly fragile, carried the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders. One evening, as the ship sailed past a nebula of deep violet and silver, Lyra brought him to the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly, and the nebula's light reflected on her shimmering skin. She spoke softly in a language Ethan was still learning, pointing to the stars and making gestures that told him of her home planet, her people, and the history of the Selene Dominion. Ethan listened, fascinated. The Dominion had faced wars, betrayals, and hardships, yet Lyra's family had survived, protecting their people across generations. He realized that the princess he had rescued was not just a royal figure. She was a symbol of hope for an entire civilization. "You saved me," Lyra said finally in broken English, her silver eyes glowing softly. "Not because of duty, not because of reward. Only because you cared." Ethan shrugged, feeling awkward. I saw someone in need." She shook her head slightly. "No, it is more than that. It is rare, precious." The words settled in him, quiet but profound. He had expected gratitude, maybe a thank you, but this was respect, recognition, something deeper than any human gesture he had ever known. Days turned into a week. The ship approached Lyra's home planet, Selene Prime, a world of blue oceans, silver forests, and mountains that glowed faintly under the twin suns. Ethan had never imagined a place so beautiful. As the ship descended, he realized the scope of what he had stepped into. The entire planet seemed alive, vibrant, and full of history. The landing was smooth, and the royal court awaited them. Hundreds of Selene citizens lined the streets, their eyes filled with curiosity and awe. And in the midst of it all, Lyra walked with him by her side, her hand brushing his gently. The citizens bowed, acknowledging him silently, and Ethan felt a weight he had never imagined. At the palace, Ethan met Lyra's family, wise and commanding figures who initially looked at him with skepticism. But as Lyra spoke of him, of how he had cared for her when she was weak and alone, their expressions softened. The act of giving a simple piece of chocolate and water was now more than a gesture. It was a story of humanity that had reached across the stars. He spent days in the palace, learning about their culture, their history, and their challenges. The more he learned, the more he realized how much his small act of kindness had changed the course of events. By helping Lyra survive, he had ensured the continuity of a royal lineage, a lineage that held the destiny of millions. One afternoon, Lyra led him to a quiet garden within the palace. Silver trees shimmered under the sunlight, their leaves reflecting soft colors. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "You are different," she said. "Other humans, they would not have stayed. They would have taken, demanded, or left me." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't think about that. I just wanted you to live." She smiled softly, her hand brushing his. "That is why you are here. That is why you are remembered. You are part of our story now." The words settled into Ethan's heart. He realized he had come to the stars by chance, but he had stayed because he had done something simple, yet extraordinary. And now he was no longer just a human lost in space. He was a bridge between two worlds. Weeks passed, and Ethan grew comfortable in the palace. He learned to navigate the complex rules of the court, to understand Lyra's subtle gestures, and to see the beauty in a world that had seemed impossible. He even began teaching the princess some human lessons: how to make simple tools, how to think differently, how to see strength in unexpected ways. Then came the day when the council gathered him formally. Lyra stood beside him, her hand lightly touching his arm. The council spoke in solemn tones, acknowledging Ethan's role in saving the princess, his bravery and his compassion. They declared that humans who act with such honor are rare, and that he would be recognized as a friend of the Selene Dominion. Ethan bowed, feeling both humbled and proud. He had not expected any of this. He had only given a piece of chocolate to a starving girl, and yet here he was, honored in a civilization beyond his imagination. Later that night, Lyra and Ethan stood on the observation deck, looking at the stars. She spoke softly. "You changed everything. Not with weapons, not with power. With kindness." Ethan nodded. "I didn't know it would matter. I was just trying to help." She smiled, her silver eyes reflecting the nebula's light. "It matters more than you realize. You are human, and that is why you are extraordinary." The twin suns set behind them, casting soft shadows over the palace. Ethan realized that his journey was far from over. He had crossed the galaxy, faced despair, and now found himself part of a story greater than he had ever imagined. He looked at Lyra, her small hand in his, and knew that sometimes The simplest acts, giving your last chocolate, offering water, showing care, could echo across worlds. And in that moment, Ethan understood that humanity, even in the smallest gestures, could shine brighter than the stars. The future awaited them, uncertain and full of challenge, but for the first time in his life, Ethan